February 3rd, 1847. Bell River Plantation, Lowndes County, Alabama. The night Colonel Nathaniel Sutton died. The moon was a thin silver blade above the cotton fields, and the air smelled of river mud and burning lamp oil. Inside the main house, the study lamp had been left on. A single flame trembled behind green glass, throwing long shadows across shelves of medical journals, breeding ledgers, and letters sealed with red wax. The colonel sat in his high-backed chair, pen frozen mid-sentence, ink pooling on the unfinished page. I have made certain arrangements regarding the future of my daughters which must be executed precisely as stipulated for their own protection and for the preservation of my life's work. Should any person attempt to sentence ended in a black smear? His hand had fallen limp. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. The coffee cup beside him was cold, a faint glitter of sediment still clinging to the porcelain bottom. At las 10:17 altoem, Jonas Pritchett, overseer whose face never changed expression, found him. He did not shout. He did not run. He simply stood in the doorway for 7 full seconds, then turned and walked upstairs to wake the twins. Sarah and Catherine were already dressed, black morning gowns, identical down to the lace cuffs. They had not been told their father was dead. They had not needed to be told. They descended the stairs together, footsteps perfectly synchronized, hands clasped so tightly their knuckles blanched white. When they reached the study doorway, Pritchett stepped aside without a word. The twins entered as one body. Sarah spoke first. Her voice was calm, precise, the same tone she used to correct arithmetic sums. "How long has he been dead?" Pritchetto. Karozemi answered without hesitation. "Since some time after midnight. Coffee cup is cold. Lamp oil is low." Catherine tilted her head, studying the body the way one studies a specimen under glass. "Heart failure. That's what Dr. Grayfield will say," Pritchett replied. Sarah's gaze moved to the unfinished letter, then to the coffee cup. She did not touch either. Instead, she looked at Pritchett. "No one enters this room until the doctor arrives. No one touches anything. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." They left the study together, closing the door behind them with a soft, final click. By noon, Dr. Amos Grayfield arrived from Han, sweating through his waistcoat despite the February chill. He examined the body for less than 4 minutes. "Hard seizure," he announced, snapping his bag shut. "Man worked himself to death. I warned him about his temperament. Too much strain. Heart gave out. Simple as that." He did not mention the glittering sediment in the cup. He did not mention the unfinished sentence. He did not mention that. The colonel's last meal tray sat untouched, except for the coffee. Sarah and Catherine stood in the hallway, hands still clasped. They had not cried. They had not spoken to each other since Pritchett woke them. They simply watched the doctor leave, then turned as one toward the parlor dot. Harold Brinage, neighboring planter and co-executor of the will, arrived an hour later. He was a large man with a politician's smile and a habit of patting women on the arm, as though they were children. When he saw the twins standing side by side in identical black, he faltered for half a second. "My condolences, ladies. This is Sutton." "Our father was 56, Catherine said. "He worked without rest. The body gives out." Brinage cleared his throat. "Still, perhaps we should examine him more thoroughly. Sudden deaths. People talk." Sarah's voice cut through the room like a blade. "The doctor has pronounced it. The funeral will be held in 3 days. Mr. Jeremiah Osgood, our father's attorney from Mobile, has been summoned until the will is read. Catherine and I will manage Bell River affairs. Pritchett will continue as overseer under our direct supervision." Brinage blinked twice. Women did not manage plantations. Certainly not unmarried women of 22. Certainly not twins who had been kept in near total seclusion for their entire lives. "Now, Miss Sarah," he began, in the tone men reserve for explaining simple facts to women. "Our father educated us specifically for this eventuality." Catherine interrupted. "We understand crop rotation, market factors, labor management. We have studied his methods for years. The plantation will continue at current productivity." The men in the room, Greenidge, Pritchett, two neighboring planters who had arrived to pay respects, exchanged glances. Something in the twins' voices, in their perfect alignment, in the way they never looked away, made the air feel colder. Sarah spoke again, softer now, but no less final. "We appreciate your concern, but this is our home, our inheritance, our responsibility. If there are questions, they can wait until Mr. Osgood arrives." Greenidge opened his mouth, closed it, nodded once. That night, after the house had gone quiet, Sarah and Catherine returned to the study. They did not light the lamp. Moonlight through the tall windows was enough. They stood over their father's body, still in the chair. "Where he?" Diane looked at him for a long time. Sarah spoke first. "He planned to sell Marcus and 3 others south. We heard him arranging it 2 nights ago." Catherine nodded. "He was going to force us into marriages with men he chose, men who would continue his work." Sarah reached out and closed her father's eyes with 2 fingers. The gesture was gentle, almost tender. Then she leaned close to the dead man's ear and whispered, "You taught us everything we know about control, about power, about what happens when someone tries to take it from you." Catherine placed her hand on Sarah's shoulder. Their reflections in the window were perfect mirrors to women in black. 2 shadows wearing the same face. Sarah straightened. "The will arrives tomorrow, whatever it says. We will not lose this place. We will not lose control. We will not become what he wanted us to be." Catherine's voice was barely audible. "Or we will become exactly what he made us, and use it against him." They left the study together, closed the door, locked it. Behind them, in the dark, the unfinished letter lay on the desk, ink still wet at the edges. And somewhere in the slave quarters, a man named Marcus who could read, who could write, who had already begun hiding pages inside a hollowed Bible, listened to the house settle into silence. He knew something the twins did not yet understand. The Colonel's death had not ended the experiment. It had only changed the scientists. The funeral of Colonel Nathaniel Sutton took place under a sky the color of wet slate. 43 white guests filled the parlor, breathing the scent of lilies and beeswax candles. Reverend Samuel Yates spoke of a life devoted to the advancement of Alabama's prosperity and the scientific understanding of God's natural order. Not one enslaved person from Bell River was permitted inside the main house that day. They gathered instead behind the quarters at dusk, singing low hymns that carried across the fields like smoke songs older than the plantation, older than the Colonel himself. Sarah and Catherine did not attend either ceremony. They remained in the study, doors locked, shutters drawn, reading their father's private letter by lamplight. The words were written in his precise, slanted hand. "I have observed your unnatural attachment to one another, your rejection of normal, feminine interests in courtship and marriage. I have concluded you will never voluntarily separate, never form alliances with men who could continue my work and properly manage this estate. Therefore, I have created a situation where you have no choice. Marry and procreate within 24 months. Or lose everything. My network of correspondence extends throughout the state and beyond. They will be watching, reporting back on your conduct and your choices. Remember always that you are what I made you, and you cannot escape the fundamental truth of your nature, no matter how you might pretend otherwise. The blood that flows through your veins is both your privilege and your prison." Sarah folded the letter with deliberate care. Catherine stared at the wall where their father's portrait had already been removed. "He knew we would never marry," Catherine said quietly. "He designed this to fail. Sarah's voice was colder. Then, we subvert the terms while fulfilling them. We find husbands we can control completely. Elderly, sickly, desperate. Men who will give us legal legitimacy without ever interfering in how we run Bell River. Catherine turned to her sister. And the children? Marcus fathers them, Sarah said without hesitation. The executives need to see pregnancies. They do not need to see what happens behind closed doors. Catherine exhaled, slowly. You're asking him to risk death. I'm offering him freedom afterward. Documented manumission. Money. A passage north. More than most ever get. Catherine studied Sarah's face for a long moment. You understand what this makes us. Sarah met her gaze, without flinching. It makes us survivors. 3 days after the funeral, Jeremiah Osgood arrived from Mobile with the will. He was a small, meticulous man who spoke in the careful cadence of someone accustomed to delivering bad news to people who could ruin him. The reading took place in the study, same chair, same desk, same unfinished letter, still lying where it had fallen. Osgood cleared his throat. Colonel Sutton revised his will on December 12, 1846. The provisions are unconventional. He read the charitable bequests. First small gifts to the Presbyterian Church. Personal items. 2 acquaintances. Then he reached the heart of it. 2. My daughters Sarah and Catherine Sutton. I leave the entirety of Bell River Plantation, including all lands, structures, livestock, equipment, and human property, to be held jointly and equally between them. However, this bequest is conditional upon the following stipulations, which must be satisfied within 24 months of my death. First, both daughters must enter into lawful Christian marriage with men of suitable character and standing approved by the executors of this estate. Second, both marriages must produce legitimate offspring within the stipulated time frame. Third, the daughters must maintain the plantation at current levels of productivity and demonstrate sound management of its resources. Should these conditions not be met, Bell River Plantation and all its assets shall be sold at public auction, with proceeds distributed equally among the following charitable institutions dedicated to the advancement of scientific understanding of human populations. Osgood looked up. There is also a private letter addressed to you both. Sarah took the sealed envelope, broke the wax, and read aloud in a voice that never wavered. The letter repeated the accusations of unnatural attachment, the threat of surveillance, the final warning about blood as privilege in prison. When she finished, silence filled the room like smoke. Osgood shifted uncomfortably. I must say, ladies, your father's provisions are highly irregular. Most attorneys would have counseled against our father's mind was entirely his own. Catherine interrupted. We will comply with his wishes. Osgood blinked. You understand the timeline? February 1849. 24 months from his death. We understand. After Osgood left, Sarah and Catherine remained in the study. They did not speak for several minutes. Then Sarah opened the bottom drawer of their father's desk and withdrew the leather-bound journal marked Reading Log 1845, 1847. She flipped to the last entry. Female number 17 Ruth lineage shows resistance to breeding assignments. Recommend increased discipline in isolation to induce compliance. Paired with male number 42 Granville stock. Results pending. Catherine's voice was soft. He documented everything. Sarah closed the journal. Then we use everything he documented. That night they summoned Marcus to the study. He entered quietly, eyes scanning the room desk, chairs, the 2 women standing side by side in identical black gowns. He had been on the plantation less than a week, purchased at auction for far more than he was worth. He had already begun hiding pages inside the hollowed Bible in his room. Sarah spoke first. You can read and write. Yes, ma'am. You tutored the Granville children. What did you teach them? Reading, writing, arithmetic, geography, history. whatever their father requested. Catherine circled him slowly. The Granvilles were Quakers, abolitionists. They allowed their slaves to be educated. Marcus's eyes flickered. Mr. Granville believed all people possessed souls and minds worthy of development. Sarah stepped closer. And you? What do you believe? Marcus met her gaze. I believe I'm standing in front of two women who paid too much for me, and who clearly have something specific in mind. Beyond field labor. The twins exchanged a glance. Sarah spoke carefully. We have an unusual situation. Our father died recently, leaving conditions on our inheritance that require creative solutions. We need someone educated, discreet, and capable of understanding complex arrangements. What kind of arrangements? The kind that must remain private within this household, Catherine said. You'll live in the main house. You'll have access to our father's library. You'll be treated well, fed properly, given freedoms that would be extraordinary elsewhere. But in exchange, you'll do exactly what we say, when we say it, without question or hesitation. Marcus was silent for a long beat. And if I refuse, then you'll be sold south, Sarah said flatly. 2 cotton plantations in Mississippi, where educated slaves are worked to death in the fields to break them of any intellectual pretensions. I can have you on a boat within a week. Marcus looked between them. What do you want from me? Sarah opened the breeding log and placed it on the desk. Our father's will requires us to marry and bear children within 24 months, or lose everything. We have no intention of submitting 2 marriages arranged by men who view us as property to be managed, so we're going to subvert the terms, while technically fulfilling them. Catherine finished it. You will father our children. The executives need to see pregnancies. They do not need to see what happens behind closed doors. Marcus stared at the open journal, at the clinical entries written in the colonel's hand. You're asking me to commit an act that could get all of us killed. If anyone discovers, Sarah said, no one will discover. We control this household completely. The marriages will be arranged carefully. We'll manage every detail, every possible witness, every piece of evidence. You'll be protected. Protected. Marcus laughed once, low and bitter. I'm a slave. There is no protection for me. If this fails, you'll be ruined socially, perhaps sent away somewhere. I'll be hanged or burned alive. Sarah stepped closer. And in exchange, you'll receive something worth the risk. Marcus looked at her. What could possibly be worth the risk? Catherine answered quietly. Documented legal freedom, enough money to go north and start a new life. We'll wait until after the children are born and the estate is secure. Then we'll manumit you, provide funds, and send you away with a cover story that holds up to scrutiny. Marcus searched their faces for deception, found none. But he also saw something else. They were offering him freedom. They were also asking him to become their father's final experiment. He thought of the pages, already hidden in his Bible. He thought of the names, dates, atrocities he had documented for 5 years under the Granvilles. He thought of the trunk he had never been able to retrieve. This was not just escape. This was a chance to expose everything. I'll do it, he said finally. On one condition. Catherine's eyes narrowed. You're not in a position to make conditions. I am. If you want my cooperation rather than my resentful compliance, I want to know everything. Your father's journals, his correspondence, his breeding logs, all of it. If I'm risking my life for this scheme, I deserve to understand the full context. The twins considered this. Giving Marcus unrestricted access to their father's papers was dangerous. Refusing might create exactly the resentment he'd warned against. Sarah nodded once. Agreed. But you'll study them here in this room, under our supervision. Nothing leaves this house. Marcus inclined his head. Acceptable. What none of them said aloud was that they had each just made a bargain with someone. They did not fully trust gambling their futures on a deception so audacious it could only succeed if every element aligned perfectly. And in Lowndes County, Alabama, in 1847, perfection was in very short supply. The summer of 1847 descended on Bell River like a fever. Cotton bloomed white across the fields. The air turned thick with humidity and the metallic scent of ripening bolls, and inside the main house, 3 people began a deception. So precise, it felt like surgery. Sarah and Catherine moved through the days with mechanical grace. They rose at dawn, reviewed ledgers with Pritchett, issued orders to the field drivers, inspected the sick wards where mercury treatments continued under Marcus's quiet supervision. They wore identical black mourning gowns that summer, refusing to shed them even as the heat made silk cling like a second skin. The servants whispered that the twins were in eternal mourning not for their father, but for something no one could name. Marcus lived in a small room at the back of the main house, a space that had once been a sewing closet. He had a narrow bed, a writing desk, and unrestricted access to the colonel's library during daylight hours. At night, he copied entries from the breeding logs, dates, forced pairings, terminations, sales of children who failed to meet standards. He wrote in microscopic script on thin paper, folding each page into the lining of his Bible. The hollowed section grew thicker with every night. Sarah and Catherine tested him constantly. They left abolition pamphlets on the desk, smuggled copies of Frederick Douglass speeches, garrison editorials, and watched what he did with them. He read them, then returned them unmarked. They asked his opinion on the Mexican War, on states' rights, on the natural order. He answered carefully, revealing nothing that could be used against him later. One evening, in late June, Sarah entered the study alone while Catherine was in Mobile meeting with a potential husband candidate. Marcus was copying a page from the 1839 log, Ruth's final entry. Sarah closed the door. "You've read enough to know what he did to our mother." Marcus set down the pen. "I know." She resisted him. Not openly. Never openly. But she taught us to read when he was away. She whispered stories of a world before chains. She died of pneumonia. We found bruises on her arms the night before. Marcus looked at her. "And you still use his methods?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "I use what I must to survive what he built." "There's a difference." "Is there?" Sarah walked to the window. Outside, the fields shimmered under moonlight. The quarters were dark, except for a few candle stubs in windows. Someone was singing low, mournful, a work song that had outlived the colonel. "I hated him," Sarah said quietly, "but I learned from him. Control, precision, the willingness to do what others won't." Catherine learned it too. Where? His daughters in ways blood can't explain. Marcus closed the journal. "Then why keep me alive? Why offer freedom? You could have sold me south the day you bought me." Sarah turned. "Because you're the only person on this plantation who sees us clearly. You know what we are. And you haven't run. You haven't betrayed us. Yet." Marcus smiled thinly. "I'm documenting everything. Every entry. Every conversation. Every night we spend in this room. If I disappear, it all goes north." Sarah studied him. "Good. Let it go north. Let the world see what he built. Let them see what we became trying to escape it." She stepped closer. "But tonight, we begin the next phase. Catherine returns tomorrow with Edmund Varley, 68, widower. Failing cotton operation. Desperate for money and status. He'll marry her for the connection. He'll accept any terms to avoid ruin." Marcus nodded. "And you?" Thomas Brinage's nephew, 34, returned from New Orleans after unfortunate investments. Deep in debt, weak, vain, perfect. Marcus leaned back. And the children. Sarah's hand drifted to her abdomen, still flat. But the decision had been made. Starting tonight. Clinical, efficient. No emotion, no attachment. Just biology. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. You hate this. I hate everything about it, Sarah whispered. But I hate losing more. She stepped to the door, paused. Catherine will come to you tomorrow night. I'll come the night after. We alternate. No exceptions. No delays. We need pregnancies confirmed by spring. Marcus did not answer. Sarah left. The door closed softly. Marcus sat in the dark for a long time, then opened the Bible and began writing again. July brought the first husband candidate. Edmund Varley arrived in a dusty carriage, sweating through. His waistcoat, eyes already calculating the value of Bell River's acreage. He bowed low to Catherine, kissed her hand with wet lips, called her my dear future bride before the introductions were finished. Catherine endured the tour of the grounds with perfect composure. She smiled when he spoke of guiding her through management. She laughed softly when he joked about taming the plantation. She let him place his hand on her arm during the walk back to the house. That night, after Varley retired to the guest room, Catherine came to my room. She wore a plain cotton shift. No jewelry. No perfume. She closed the door, locked it. Marcus stood by the window. You don't have to do this. Catherine's voice was flat. Yes, I do. She crossed the room, lay on the narrow bed, stared at the ceiling. Make it quick. Marcus hesitated. Then he moved to the bed. It was over in minutes. Catherine rose immediately, adjusted her shift, left without looking back. The next night, Sarah came. She was more methodical. She instructed him like a surgeon giving directions. She did not speak. When it was finished, she dressed, paused at the door. Thank you, she said quietly. Marcus looked at her. Don't. Sarah left. The pattern continued through August. Catherine with Varley. Sarah with Thomas Brinnage's nephew. The executives approved both Marcus Varley for his established name, Thomas for his youthful vigor, and connection to Breen IDGE. By September, both twins were pregnant. Dr. Grayfield confirmed it during his monthly visit to check syphilis treatments. He congratulated them with the same detached cheer he used for successful full births. Both strong pulses. You'll be mothers by spring. Sarah and Catherine thanked him. They did not smile. That night, in the study, Catherine placed her hand on her abdomen. I feel it moving. Sarah looked at her. So, do, e. They sat in silence. Then Catherine whispered, We're keeping them. Sarah nodded once. We're keeping them. Marcus, listening from the doorway where he had come to return a ledger, felt something shift inside him. He had come to Bell River expecting monsters. He had found two women forged in the same fire that had burned their mother. They were still dangerous. They were still capable of terrible things, but they were also beginning to choose something other than survival. And Marcus, still copying pages, still planning his escape, realized he might not want to leave just yet. Not until he saw what they would become when the babies arrived. Not until he saw whether redemption was possible even here. Winter 1848 arrived early in Lowndes County. Frost came in October, blackening the last bolls on the stalks, turning the fields into a graveyard of white ghosts. Inside Bell River's main house, the fireplaces burned day and night, but the warmth never reached the study where Sarah, Catherine, and Marcus met after dark. Sarah's pregnancy was visible now 5 months along. Her black morning gowns replaced with looser charcoal dresses. Catherine lagged behind by 3 weeks, but the swell was unmistakable. Both women moved with the careful economy of people carrying fragile cargo. They no longer alternated nights with Marcus. The biological necessity had been met. Now, they waited for the babies, waited for the executor's final inspection, waited for the 24-month deadline in February 1849. But waiting cracked things open. Thomas Brinage had been at Bell River since the wedding. He drank heavily, wandered the halls at odd hours, muttered about my plantation when he thought no one heard. Sarah had been clear during their wedding night conversation. You get income, respectability, a roof. In exchange, you stay out of my way. You ask no questions about management. You never touch me again without permission, and you never speak of how quickly I conceived. Thomas had signed the prenuptial agreement with shaking hands. He had agreed, but alcohol loosened promises. One night in early December, Thomas stumbled into the parlor, where Sarah sat reading by lamplight. He was drunk, shirt untucked, eyes glassy. "You think I don't know?" he slurred. "Quick work, wife." "Too quick. That child ain't mine." Sarah closed the book slowly. "You're mistaken." Thomas laughed a wet, ugly sound. "I may be a drunk, but I'm not blind. You and that secretary, Marcus. I've seen the way you look at each other, the way he disappears into the study at night. You think I'm stupid?" Sarah stood. "You signed the agreement. You accepted the terms." Thomas lurched forward. "I signed because I was drowning in debt, but I won't be cuckolded in my own house." Sarah's voice remained even. "This is not your house. It never will be." Thomas's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. "You'll give me what I want, or I'll tell Brinage everything. I'll tell the whole county. Your bastard child, your nigger lover. They'll hang him. They'll take this place from you." Sarah did not flinch. She looked at his hand on her wrist, then at his face. "Let go." Thomas tightened his grip. "Make me." From the doorway, Catherine's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Let her go." Thomas turned. Catherine stood there, 6 months pregnant, holding a small derringer in her right hand. The barrel was steady. Thomas laughed again. "You wouldn't shoot your own sister's husband?" Catherine thumbed back the hammer. "Try me." Thomas stared at the gun, at Catherine's face, at Sarah's calm, waiting expression. He released Sarah's wrist, stepped back, raised his hands. "You're both mad," he muttered. "You'll burn for this." Catherine lowered the derringer, but did not uncock it. "Leave this room, sleep it off, and never speak of this night again. If you do, I will kill you, and no one will ever find the body." Thomas backed out of the parlor. The door closed behind him. Sarah exhaled slowly. Catherine lowered the gun. "Completely." Sarah looked at her sister. "You kept that loaded." Catherine's voice was quiet. "Since the night father died, I've carried it every day." Sarah nodded once. "Good." They did not speak of it again, but the fracture had begun. January brought Lawrence Kemper's decline. Consumption had him bedridden by Christmas. He coughed blood into handkerchiefs, thanked servants for every sip of water, called Catherine my angel when she brought him broth. He never suspected the pregnancy was not his. Catherine visited him daily. She read to him Shakespeare, Milton, the same books their father had forced on them as children. Lawrence listened with tears in his eyes. "I was never much of a husband," he wheezed one afternoon, "but I'm grateful for these months. You've given me peace." Catherine looked at him thin, gray, diamond, felt something unfamiliar move inside her chest. Not love, not pity, something closer to recognition. That night, she came to Marcus's room. She did not speak. She simply stood in the doorway until he looked up from his copying. "He's dying," she said. Marcus set down the pen. I know. Catherine stepped inside, closed the door. I didn't want him to suffer. I thought nature would take him quickly. But it's slow, and he's grateful. He thanks me every day. Marcus watched her. You're not like your father. Catherine laughed, once sharp, bitter. I'm exactly like him. I married a dying man knowing he'd never live to see the child. I let him believe it was his. I'm using him the way father used everyone. Marcus stood. You're not forcing anyone into breeding pens. You're not poisoning children who don't meet standards. You're letting a man die with dignity, instead of accelerating it. That's not the same. Catherine looked at him really. Looked, you hate us. I hated what you represented, Marcus said. I don't know what you are anymore. Catherine stepped closer. I don't know either. She placed her hand on her belly. I feel her moving. She kicks when I'm angry. She calms. When I read aloud, she's alive. And I didn't expect to care. Marcus looked at her hand. What will you name her? Ruth, Catherine said without hesitation. After our mother. The woman who tried to save us when no one else would. Marcus nodded. And Sarah's Abigail. After the grandmother we never knew. The one father erased from every record. They stood in silence. Then Catherine whispered, when this is over, when the babies are born and the will is satisfied, will you stay? Marcus looked at her. I'm a slave. Not forever, Catherine said. We promised freedom. We'll keep that promise. Marcus studied her face. And if I stay, what then? Catherine looked away. I don't know. I don't know what we become after this. I don't know if we can be anything other than what he made us. Marcus reached out slowly, carefully, and placed his hand over hers on her belly. The baby kicked once, strong and insistent. Catherine's breath caught. Marcus did not pull away. February 1849 arrived with sleet and wind that rattled the shutters like bones. The executors came on the 5/10th Breenage, and another planter, both bundled against the cold. They examined the babies Abigail and Ruth now, 2 months old, healthy, dark-haired, ambiguous enough in feature to pass under scrutiny. Breen looked at Sarah. The conditions are met. Belle River is yours. Sarah inclined her head. Thank you. After they left, Sarah and Catherine stood in the nursery. Abigail slept in one cradle. Ruth in the other. Sarah spoke quietly. We did it. Catherine looked at her sister. We survived him. Marcus entered, carrying 2 sets of manumission papers freshly signed, sealed, witnessed by Osgood, in Mobile. Your freedom, he said, handing one to each. Sarah took hers. Catherine took his. They looked at the documents for a long moment. Then Sarah said, Marcus, we want you to stay. Not as property. As whatever you choose to be. Marcus looked at the 2 women who had owned him, used him, threatened him, and who had also saved him. He looked at the 2 sleeping babies. He looked at the papers in his hand. Then he tore them in half. Sarah's eyes widened. What are you doing? Marcus let the pieces fall. I'm staying, not because you own me, but because I choose to. Because these children deserve more than 2 mothers who are still learning how to be human. Because Belle River needs to be something other than what your father made it. Catherine's voice cracked. You could go north. You could be free. Marcus looked at her. I will be free. Here, with them, with you if you'll let me. Sarah reached out, took his hand. Catherine took the other. For the first time since their father's death, the twins did not hold hands with each other. They held his. Outside, sleet tapped against the windows like distant applause. Inside, 3 people stood in silence watching, 2 sleeping children who carried no knowledge of the horrors that had come before them. And for the first time in generations, Bell River Plantation felt something new enter its walls. Not peace, not forgiveness, but possibility. February 1849 came in like a held breath. The executors arrived on the 20th Brigade, and the second man, bundled in wool against the sleet that stung the windows like glass shards. They inspected Abigail and Ruth now, 3 months old, and the nursery. Abigail had Sarah's dark hair and Marcus's steady eyes. Ruth had Catherine's delicate features and the same quiet watchfulness. Both babies were healthy. Both were alive. Both proved the conditions met. Brinage looked at Sarah and Catherine standing side by side, still in identical gray dresses, though the morning black had been put away. The pregnancies are confirmed. The marriages are documented. Productivity has been maintained. Bell River is yours. Sarah inclined her head. Thank you. Catherine said nothing. Her hand rested lightly on Ruth's cradle. After the executors left, the house settled into a silence deeper than any before. Thomas Brinage drank himself into stupor in his room. Lawrence Kemper's grave had settled under January frost. The syphilis treatments had saved most of the infected. The rest were buried quietly in the family, plot marked, unnamed. That night, Sarah, Catherine, and Marcus met in the study for the last time. The fire in the grate was low. The colonel's portrait had been removed months earlier. The wall still showed a pale rectangle where it had hung. Sarah placed 2 sets of manumission papers on the desks, sealed, witnessed. 1 for Marcus, 1 more blank, waiting for a name. Your freedom, she said, and enough gold to reach Philadelphia and begin again. Marcus looked at the papers, then at the twins, then at the 2 cradles they had moved into the corner of the steady Abigail and Ruth, sleeping side by side. I tore the first set, he said quietly. I'm staying, not because you own me, because I choose to. These children deserve more than 2 mothers, still learning how to be human. This place needs to be something other than what your father made it. Catherine's voice cracked. You could be free. I will be free, Marcus said. Here. With them. With you if you'll let me. Sarah reached out. Her hand closed. Around his. Catherine took the other. For the first time in their lives, the twins did not hold each other's hands. They held his. Outside, sleet tapped the windows like distant applause. Inside, 3 people stood in silence. 2 sleeping children who carried no knowledge of the horrors that had come before them. And for the first time in generations, Bell River Plantation felt something new enter its walls. Not peace, not forgiveness, but possibility. But possibility is fragile, and fragile things burn. October 15th, 1849, Hanville Courthouse. The fire started in the basement just after midnight. A lamp overturned, officials would later say. Flames raced up the wooden stairs, caught the dry records, devoured them. By dawn, the building was a blackened shell. 3 sets of human remains were found chained to iron rings in the basement, while identified as vagrants seeking shelter. No one looked closely at why they had been chained. No one questioned why the chains were new. Most records from 1847-1849 were destroyed. Were probate documents for the Sutton estate, marriage certificates, property deeds, the will, the breeding logs, the names of 63 enslaved people and their children, all gone. Sarah and Catherine had left Alabama 2 days earlier. They boarded a ship in Mobile, bound for New Orleans, traveling as widowed sisters with infant daughters. They carried false papers, gold sewn into hymns, and the 2 cradles that held Abigail and Ruth. They reached Wisconsin in December 1849, purchased a small farm outside Madison under new names, presented themselves as widows, starting over. No one asked questions. No one looked twice at two women with dark-haired daughters and steady eyes. Marcus followed 3 weeks later. He traveled north under his manumission papers, now filed and legal. He arrived at the farm in January 1850. Sarah and Catherine met him at the gate. Abigail and Ruth were walking now toddlers who ran to him without fear. He never left. Years passed in quiet layers. The Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society published their report in July 1849, Marcus's testimony, smuggled out in coded pages. Colonel Nathaniel Sutton was named, his breeding program exposed, his correspondence network revealed. The report caused outrage in the North, fury in the South, but the fire in Hanvel had already erased the proof. Bell River was sold in 1850 to a cotton speculator who burned the main house in 1853 insurance money, people said. The land changed hands 3 more times before the Civil War. After Appomattox, it became sharecrop land, then nothing. Sarah and Catherine never spoke of Alabama again. They raised Abigail and Ruth on the Wisconsin farm, teaching them to read, to question, to never lower their gaze. The girls grew up knowing only that their mothers had come from a hard place, had escaped difficult circumstances, and that their father had been a good man who made sacrifices. Marcus never married. He never had other children, but he taught. Abigail and Ruth, mathematics, history, geography, the same lessons the colonel had forced on his own daughters. He told them stories of a place far south, where the cotton grew tall and the nights were long. He never told them the full truth. In 1863, a Union lieutenant discovered a sealed trunk in Bell River's ruins, breeding logs, correspondence, that confirmed everything in the Pennsylvania report and added new horrors. The documents became part of the case for why slavery must end completely. Colonel Nathaniel Sutton's legacy became exactly what his daughters had predicted: exposure, condemnation, evidence of systematic evil. But the full truth about Sarah and Catherine, about Marcus and the children, remained hidden in burned records, carefully constructed lies, and the silence of 3 people who had survived by becoming something new. They lived out their days on that Wisconsin farm. Sarah died in 1882, Catherine in 1885, Marcus in 1891. Abigail and Ruth buried them side by side in the small family plot behind the house. No markers carried the name Sutton, only Freeman. And on quiet nights, when the wind moved through the fields, the 2 sisters' daughters sometimes heard a low, mournful song carried on the breeze, a work song older than memory. They never knew its origin. They only knew it felt like home. The courthouse fire was never solved. The bodies never identified. The truth never fully recovered. But perhaps that silence is the victory. Duncan searched until his last breath and found nothing. His perfect plant, well, sense, a rigged auction, a brother poisoned, a woman delivered to torment only air. Ruth Chambers died, smiling. Clarara lived us. Somewhere, somehow beyond his reach. And somewhere a child named Ruth grew up hearing the story of a woman who chose death so that freedom could live. The law called it property. The grave called it defiance. And history finale called it by name. What do you think of this story? Do you believe Sarah and Catherine truly changed? Or were they just better at hiding what their father taught them? Do you think Marcus stayed out of love, guilt, or something colder? And what secrets do you think are still buried in those burned courthouse records? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me your city or state. While you're at it, I love seeing where these dark histories reach. If this tale of twisted survival calculated revenge, and fragile redemption gripped you. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Liturgy of Fear uncovers the corners of American history textbooks won't touch. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. The next story might be even darker. Until then, remember, the cruelest fires aren't the ones that burn buildings. They're the ones that burn records, names, and truth itself. See you in the next one.